Given the ubiquity of the internet, you've probably seen these debates regarding God's existence. Dawkins, Harris, and most entertaining of all, Hitch versus, well, who cares? These debates are fascinating and compelling entertainment, and I hate them with a passion. Why? Because unless the atheist begins a debate on the existence of God by clarifying before one word is said that the question of God's existence cannot be answered merely with arguments, the atheist will appear to lose. And so far, I haven't seen a single atheist do this. What is required to establish the existence of God is evidence. And arguments are simply not evidence. Don't get me wrong, arguments are an effective tool of persuasion. But to establish the actual existence of something, God, fairies, Bigfoot, Urkel, you need actual evidence. This is one of the great insights that launched the scientific revolution. Arguments in and of themselves, regardless of how sound, bring with them not 1 ounce of actual knowledge outside pure mathematics. Arguments by themselves are proof of nothing, and arguments that rely primarily on human intuition are almost entirely worthless. The Ptolemaic model of our solar system was a pretty good argument. In fact, if you allow for Ptolemy's epicycles and equants and deference and an offset Earth, his model does a really good job of predicting the motions of the planets. And intuitively, it makes a whole lot more sense than the idea that we are traveling around the sun, spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. Watching the night sky, it seems intuitively obvious that everything is moving around us and that we are standing absolutely still. Of course, that's not the case. How do we know? Well, because some people wouldn't settle for mere argument and intuition. And they wouldn't allow themselves to cheat by using the additional arguments Ptolemy used, epicycles, equants, deference, and an offset Earth, to bring that theory in line with observation. Someone finally had the courage to gather the data and follow that data wherever it led, even when that data fell afoul of the divine word and our comfortable intuitions regarding the place of humanity at the center of the cosmos. Humans also simply got better at observing, thanks to technology. But this is the history of science. Our natural intuitions about the way things work are constantly being proved unreliable. In essence, the methods of science are built on one very simple notion. The human heart and the human brain, they suck, and they cannot be trusted. Why? Because we all have a host of cognitive and emotional biases that hinder our efforts to get at the truth, particularly when a given truth is not something we want to hear. For a very long time, we gave in to those biases and enjoyed the comfort they provided the human ego. But for the most part, we know better now. In fact, science is basically just a methodology for becoming aware of our biases and making a systematic end run around them. To acquire actual knowledge, repeatable, demonstrable, actionable knowledge, you need to take the human frailty of intuition, bias, and want out of the equation and put your Joe Friday on. Just the facts. And with regard to the question of God's existence, you have to begin by understanding that arguments are not just the facts. Arguments are devices of persuasion which often ask us to draw conclusions which are in fact not evident or factually grounded. In science, an argument by itself is simply an hypothesis for which one would then need to gather evidence and run experiments in order to confirm the hypothesis. But the argument or hypothesis is the beginning of the process, not the end. The argument itself settles nothing, and by itself warrants no conclusion. The hypothesis may be right, but it is not the argument itself that tells us so. It's the evidence gathered and tested which confirms the argument, or hypothesis. Many seemingly self-evident hypotheses have crashed and burned in the light of a well-constructed experiment or new evidence. In fact, an argument or hypothesis being confirmed by evidence and experiment is the exception, not the rule. Because anyone can make up an argument or come up with an hypothesis. Few, however, can back up that hypothesis or argument with supporting evidence. In talking to believers, as I've done for the past 22 years, I found that this idea about knowledge and intuition is at the core of what most divides skeptics from believers. I understand that something can make absolute perfect sense. It can be as intuitively rational and seemingly self-evident as anything can possibly be. And it can also be dead wrong. This is why an argument for the existence of God is insufficient and unpersuasive. It's why atheists like me currently reject all claims regarding the existence of a supernatural being. I remain open to the possibility, but I need more than an argument. I need actual evidence. Now, having said that, let's look at the single most popular argument for God's existence, the argument presented at virtually every debate regarding the existence of God, the Kalam cosmological argument. The argument is a simple syllogism and goes like this. 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Then, theists go on to say that this cause is the God of classical theism. The first problem with this argument, aside from the fact that it is merely an argument, is that premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause, is simply, well, argumentative. Do we know that everything that begins to exist has a cause? Intuitively, that statement makes perfect sense, and I'll even admit that I can't think of anything that began existing without a cause. But given the history of ideas which seemed intuitively self-evident and were later proved to be completely wrong, I just can't find this argument in any way compelling, not if I'm being intellectually honest. The bigger problem with Kalam is that it does nothing to establish that this cause is any kind of God, let alone the God of Abraham. Even if sound, Kalam tells us only that our universe has a cause. It does not, let me repeat, it does not tell us what that cause is. To presume to know anything more about this cause is an unwarranted leap. And if you're going to make an unwarranted leap, you don't need a good argument to do so. What exactly does Kalam tell us about this cause? Does it tell us that this cause is the God of classical theism? No. Does Kalam tell us that this cause is beyond space and time? No. Does Kalam tell us that this cause is without a beginning? No. Does it tell us that this cause is all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good? No. Does Kalam even tell us that this cause is a personal being, let alone a personal being who cares for Homo sapiens in the early part of the 21st century? No. What Kalam leaves us with is another big fat zero in terms of actual knowledge of a God. This really is their best argument, the headliner with which they open virtually every debate. But at best, Kalam gets us deism, the belief that there is a creative force responsible for the universe. But deism stops there without claiming any additional knowledge of this creative force, such as revelation, miracles, or knowledge of any kind of a personal being who intervenes in human affairs. Kalam, even if sound, leaves us once again with nothing but our ignorance. And unfortunately for many believers, this ignorance is sufficient. In fact, Kalam really is nothing but another argument from ignorance. We don't know what caused the universe, so there must be a God. If you break down the structure there, all arguments from ignorance are the same. We don't know X, therefore we know Y. We don't know, therefore we do know. This is not sound reasoning, my friends. Our ignorance cannot make us less so. I don't know why or how I am continually, over the course of a lifetime, losing one of my socks every time I send a pair to the wash. But that lack of knowledge does not warrant the assumption of a mystical agent or force that is taking my socks from me. In fact, the explanation is probably very simple. That turned out to be the case with our solar system as well. The actual explanation that our Earth revolves around the sun, while not immediately obvious or particularly intuitive, was ultimately far more simple and elegant than Ptolemy's solution with its epicycles and equants and deference and an offset Earth. Those were contortions or manipulations used to make the theory fit observation. Sound familiar? Well, you're right. Ptolemy was just another apologist, making right what was clearly wrong. Apologists who use kalam, pretending that it tells us anything about God, are in the same boat, contorting a syllogism in order to make us think that it warrants a conclusion, which, even if warranted, tells us nothing. Kalam, like almost every apologetic response, relies on people not taking that next step and asking, so what? The universe has a cause, and? Empty syllogisms are hardly a substitute for actual evidence, and I am left to wonder once again, even if God exists, why should I care when theists are unable to provide any actual, repeatable, demonstrable knowledge of this supposed being, his existence, his character, or his will? Am I really supposed to turn over my entire life to a book and a people and ideas about how I should live my life merely because they've presented an unverified argument suggesting the universe has a cause? These arguments simply beg the question, how do you know? And in this case, how do you know this cause is a God? What is your evidence? And by evidence, I don't mean yet another argument. Finally, that theists actually have to debate the existence of God is the ultimate admission of modern theism's emptiness, made even emptier by the fact that all they can do is present arguments. At these debates, what you won't see is the theist presenting any actual evidence. You'll hear arguments until the cows come home, but actual evidence? Not a chance. Even the arguments used today by theists have become mere abstractions, purely philosophical, entirely evidence-free, like kalam. Theists no longer come to a debate like they used to, arguing that we have actual evidence of God's existence in God's holy word. Why? Because we've been testing that hypothesis for the last 400 years, and at every turn we find nothing but utter failure. The universe was not created in 6 days. Our Earth is nothing new. Death is not something that occurred only after man appeared on the scene, nor did Homo sapiens appear suddenly and recently on this planet. Where we've been able to test these arguments, these hypotheses, they've fallen at virtually every turn. That is why religious people need apologists, because the evidence we should find based on these claims, based on God's holy word, simply isn't there. This was not the way things worked before the advent of fact-checking. Moses did not go to Pharaoh with arguments. He brought actual evidence in the form of plagues and the death of the firstborns. Noah gave us 40 days and 40 nights of rain, and Jesus supposedly left us with an empty tomb. All of these things were foretold, giving people the ability to test the claims of these religious leaders who asserted a connection to a higher power and then proved it. No faith required. The message used to be clear. Gods who exist don't leave their existence open for debate, which is why the modern religious apologist, having been left with nothing more than an argument, is so pathetic. But that's not even the worst of it, because there is a required element of faith in the God of Abraham that actually makes knowledge of God impossible. And that's what we'll be talking about next time on The God Distraction. I hope you'll join me, and thanks again for watching.